Hey everybody, Gromlos here with another Was on the video. Well, I was hoping I can make another Enduring Confrontation video this week, but sadly it seems we still don't get an ESC test this week. I hope we get one soon. So, when I looked at the lineup we had on Tuesday, that's when I recorded, I saw it was US vs Japan, and I thought I'd make a video with the F4U-1a Corsair. I do not have many US fighter videos in simulator battles so far, with the exception of the Wildcat. Now, the Corsair is like the Yak-9 from last week, a bit undergeared. It's on 3.3 in sim mode, that is the same as the A6M20. Now, what's funny or sad, depending on how you look at it, is that the Japanese captured Corsair is only on 3.0, lower than the US one, and according to the battle rating changes that are coming up in 2 weeks, it will get down there to 2.7 even. So the Japanese Corsairs will be on the same battle rating than US F4 F3 Wildcats. That is of course a straight up pay to win. If you get the premium Corsair, you get the same plane with a lower tiered opposition. An interesting decision to say the least, and even though it was announced after complaints that this would be changed, the fact that two exactly identical planes ended up at different battle ratings to begin with is of course an example of why the current battle rating system just doesn't work really. But I will talk about this later on in another video. Let's take a look at the F4U Corsair. Now, let me give you a bit of an overview of the plane before we look at it in a battle. The Corsair with its distinct gull wing is one of the most recognizable planes of World War II and usually considered a contender for the best fighter plane of the war, and for good reason. Now, the Corsair has a large Wright W2800 radial engine, the same engine that is also used in the P-47 Thunderbolt I have already made a video about, so it has access to similar horsepower. In case of the F4U-1, that's about 2000 horsepower on military and about 2100 horsepower on war emergency power. That's a little less than the P-47 in War Thunder makes, which reaches 2300 horsepower on war emergency power. That is because the P-47 we have in War Thunder is a late D version with a newer version of the engine. Well, while the engine is similar, there are quite a few big differences between the two planes. For example, the method of supercharging the engine. The Thunderbolt is of course known for its massive exhaust-driven turbocharger in the rear of the plane, which gives it its superb high-altitude performance, with the ability to keep its maximum horsepower up at altitudes where other fighters have only a fraction of their full horsepower left. The Corsair in comparison uses an, at the time far more common, mechanical-driven supercharger. The two-stage two-space super of the Corsair still gives the Corsair perfectly sufficient high-altitude performance for most of its tasks, as it was not usually used to escort P-17s and P-29s at extreme altitudes. And in War Thunder, with the low altitudes we fight at here, we rarely, if ever, reach the Corsair's critical altitude in a fight. Now, while the huge turbo of the Thunderbolt gives the plane its great high-altitude performance, it is also, thanks to its size, mostly responsible for the Thunderbolt's size and the very high weight. The Corsair in comparison is quite a bit lighter and smaller. Though it is by no means a lightweight, with roughly 5300 kilos takeoff weight, it is still over 2 tons heavier than a BA-409 G10 for example. But this, in comparison to the Thunderbolt, lighter weight and smaller size, is what gives the Corsair superior speed to the Thunderbolt at altitudes below the Corsair's critical altitude, as well as much better power to weight ratio. The Corsair is faster since the two planes have about the same horsepower, but the Corsair creates less drag, being lighter and smaller. The Thunderbolt, on the other hand, would have the higher maximum speed overall, since it can fly faster at very high altitude, where the drag is lower due to the atmosphere being thinner, while still having its full power. But again, the Corsair is faster below that very high altitude, and that speed is what makes the Corsair such an effective aircraft in this matchup, since the F4U-1 in this matchup will face primary planes that are much slower, with the exception of the Raiden. So if you keep your speed up, the Corsair is very hard to deal with. Now, being a plane initially meant for carrier operations, though it flew mostly from land bases during World War II, it was desirable not to have the wing loading of the plane become too high, so that the landing speed could be kept reasonably slow. As a result, the Corsair has a rather large wing, with a wing area and wingspan actually surpassing that of the larger Thunderbolt. That helps to keep the wing loading of the plane relatively low for a plane of its size and weight, similar to that of the P-409 F4 or G2, so the plane can still turn reasonably if necessary, but versus the Japanese this should be avoided whenever possible to keep speed up. While the plane has a wing loading similar to that of a F4U-1a, the Corsair is much heavier and has a lower power-to-weight ratio, so it will lose speed in turns much faster, something to keep in mind. Now, armament-wise, we have the typical 650 caliber machine guns you get in most US fighters. And they certainly perform well versus light and not well protected fighters, though they can be a bit unreliable versus larger, better armored planes. Now, while I generally really like the plane, one thing that annoys me a bit is the visibility from the cockpit. While it is great to the front and sides, there is pretty much no visibility to the direct rear, so you simply have a blind spot directly behind you, and there is a large round plate above the pilot's head that reduces visibility directly up. Both things that make fighting in the vertical in the plane much harder, and giving an opportunity to planes to sneak up directly from behind. I actually hope we get an earlier version of the F4U-1 with a birdcage canopy one day. I think I would prefer that. While the visibility to the front and sides would be worse, the birdcage canopy of the early F4Us is similar to that of, for example, the P-40, and it has the cutouts in the razorback behind the pilot that improve the visibility to the rear, like the P-40 has. And if you fly a P-40 in War Thunder, you can see that while the struts of the canopy can be annoying, the visibility to the rear is just fine. Other than that, the F4U is a great plane. Well, let's take a look in a battle in it. Here we are at the Saipan map, and I started by climbing a bit towards the southern island. As I reach it, I can spot the plane coming in from the other side and start to descend towards it, building up speed. So when I reach the plane, it turns out to be a Raiden. I have quite a bit of speed built up. As we merge, the Raiden goes into a descending turn, while I use my speed to go straight up. I have to roll a bit while doing so to keep an eye on the Raiden and not to lose it in a blind spot behind my plane, and then as my speed drops, I just let the nose come around and drop back towards the Raiden and dive back down to attack. The Raiden pulls up towards me, but it is not enough that he can get his guns on me, and I fire a burst as he crosses in front of me and set the Raiden on fire. After the attack, I climb back up to regain some altitude and looking around for other targets, since it is early in the game and there might be other enemy planes nearby and at altitude, but also keeping an eye on the Raiden to see where he is going should the fire not be enough. But it is, and the Raiden goes down. Now I could see another plane, a twin-engine fighter, coming straight at me. I was fairly sure that it was a Lightning, we have a few of them on our team, but since the Japanese also have twin-engine fighters and this one was coming at me pretty aggressively, I kept an eye on it too, just in case. But it was indeed a Lightning. There are however a few planes back where I came from, over the Blue Invasion Force, and I assume that at least a few of them are enemy planes, so I descend towards them. There isn't too much AA fire coming from the ground forces, so there can't be too many enemy planes left there. But I could see at least one set of orange tracers, so at least one enemy plane has to be mixed in there. It is hard to see at first, but as I get closer I can eventually identify a Zero, which appears to be attacking another P-38 Lightning. So I adjust my course to hopefully be able to slot in behind the Zero. However, there are quite a few other friendly planes around as well, and the Zero is already under attack before I can get in range. Another P-38 Lightning eventually hits the Zero and takes it out, and there don't seem to be any other enemy planes around here, so I use the speed I had built up to get back to altitude, and the rest of the friendly planes around me seem to have a similar idea. And we start to head towards the northern island, where I can see some tracer fire and a few friendly AI planes are going down over the airfield there. Now I plan to climb a bit more, then cool down the engine and dive down on the enemy planes over the island, using my speed and altitude advantage to stay out of trouble. But I don't get much climbing done though. I can soon see some tracers coming from in front of me at low altitude over the water in front of the island I am heading towards. So I point my nose down towards the planes fighting down there and start to dive towards them. I'm not 100% sure if the friendly planes down there are AI Hellcats or players, but since the AI Hellcats are usually over the airfield, I assume they are players, and I don't want to waste time if they are in trouble. There are a few planes down there, and as I get closer I can eventually identify a Hayabusa to my right, which is moving away from me towards the island, which is good for me as it presents a good target for a no deflection high-speed attack from behind. So I go after the Hayabusa. I close in on the Hayabusa and I fire a quick burst before the Hayabusa turns out of the way. Now I did not think I did a lot of damage, but of course I don't want to turn after the Hayabusa to make sure, which eventually goes down anyway. There are more targets in front of me and I have a lot of speed built up, so I just keep going for the next one that shows up in front of me. There are two Zeros, one smoking and diving down and one passing in front of me, and a Ki-61, which at the moment presents the best target. I fire a long burst and the Ki-61 goes down, and I start to climb straight up, but I can see the smoking Zero down on the deck attacking another plane, so I adjust my flight path to come back down on this one and take the damaged Zero out of the game completely. As my nose is pointing down again, the Zero is directly below me and I dive straight down on him and fire a burst at the Zero, which appears to try to do an emergency landing. I think I helped speed the landing process up a bit. Now I trade the speed from the dive back into altitude and climb back up a bit over a kilometer, and I can already see some more tracer fire down behind the airfield. As my speed drops and I reach the top of my arc, I let the nose drop towards the tracer fire and start to dive towards the fight there. Though not straight at it, I dive down a bit steeper to build up speed and then come into the fight at a shallower angle to hopefully attack a target as it turns away from me at the shallow angle where it is easy to hit, and then go back up. I can see a few enemy planes as I close in and I am looking for a good target, which I can easily hit in a high speed pass without having to turn too much. One enemy plane seems to be a bit higher flying to my left, but then a Corsair is coming in front of me, attacking another Zero, and he has a Hayabusa behind him, and they end up in front of me. I decide to go for this Hayabusa, but a Thunderbolt comes in and shoots the Zero off the Corsair's tail before I can get there, so I go back up to get above the fight and dive on another target. I climb back up to 1300 meters and slowly come around again. I can see some tracers below me and I get ready to dive on them, as I can see a Zero to my left climbing up to me to attack. Now I'm not sure about the energy state of the Zero at the moment, so I just point my nose down and dive away. As I come out of the dive, I am a good 100 kph faster than the Zero's top level speed, and even though my speed will slowly drop down now a bit that I have leveled out, till I hit my top level speed. My top level speed is of course much faster than that of a Zero, and I'm out of range pretty much immediately. My engine is overheating since a while though, and I have to cool it down a bit, and since I'm not 100% sure how long that will take, I decide to leave the area a bit to make sure I don't get attacked when I cool the engine down. So I fly out towards the sea in a slight climb to get some altitude, while also getting some horizontal separation from the fighting over the island, and look back to make sure I'm not being followed by anyone. But nobody is, and the Zero that was chasing me initially is also long gone. And then I throttle back to cool my engine down. Now to my left I can in the meantime see another fight going on, and I plan to head there as soon as my engine is sufficiently cooled down, using the altitude I'm building up slowly now to get an advantage. I can at the moment only see red tracers from 50 cals, but the AA from the friendly landing boats is also firing, indicating the position of an enemy plane. It does not take too long to get the engine temperature back to acceptable levels, so I throttle back up and slowly start to turn towards the fight over the friendly landing craft, hoping to find an enemy plane there to attack. However, there appears to be only one enemy plane there, and this one is already under attack by a friendly plane, another F4U, and it eventually shoots down the enemy plane long before I am in range to attack myself. However, the fight over the island itself is not entirely over yet, though I assume it is slowly coming to an end with so many planes already destroyed. Behind the airport there's still some more AA coming from ships, which I think are friendly, so there have to still be a few enemy planes around. So I make my way there, going into a shallow dive to speed up a bit. By this point I expect most enemy planes to be low too. As I close in on the airfield I can spot a plane to my left flying towards the airfield, and I change course to intercept. It turns out to be a Thunderbolt though, and I break off and climb a bit. At the same time I notice another plane lower to my right. When I take a closer look, it turns out to be a Hayabusa lower over the airfield. He is going for a landing it seems, and if I find no other targets I am going to attack to take that plane out of the fight. But first I want to take another look around to make sure there are no flying enemies around I can attack instead. After all, it's not like the landed plane is going anywhere fast, so I know where he is if I find nobody else. However, as I look to my left, I can see another plane there, also flying towards the airfield on lower altitude. It's another Hayabusa, so I do a wing over and go after it. I point my nose at the Hayabusa and dive towards it. The Hayabusa, as I close in, turns around to go after another Corsair that is low and slow, and turns towards me in the process, so I have to attack from the front. I fire a burst but don't get a hit, and I go back up to get above the Hayabusa again. With the limited visibility to the direct rear of the Corsair, I have to roll the plane again while going up to keep an eye on the Hayabusa and then come around to dive back towards it. As I come down, the Hayabusa evades another plane, and I can come in directly from behind and fire a long burst with relatively little deflection that takes the Hayabusa out. And then I go back up again to trade some speed for altitude. Now at this point though, I have to say I am getting a bit reckless. The enemy team is almost out of points and we seem to have air superiority here, with a lot of enemy planes already shot down. And matches on Saipan usually don't take very long, so I honestly expect the match to be over every second now. As I spot an enemy bomber, a Ki-49, I therefore decide to pump some more ammo into that one to get some more points and then fly back to our airfield to rearm, and the game would most likely going to be over before I get back there. I did not expect much more resistance at this point. I can see one more enemy fighter to my right, but he is set ablaze by a friendly plane, so I keep going for the Ki-49 in front of me. The bomber is flying close to the ground, and I close in fast from behind, a little offset to the side. I open fire as soon as I am in range, and then I focus my fire on the right engine nacelle as good as I can to hopefully set it on fire, but no such luck. But I think I at least damaged the right engine. As I go back up to reset for my next attack, King Cobra also attacks the Ki-49. I do a bit of a canopy roll and then point my nose back towards the Ki-49. The King Cobra is also coming around to attack the Ki-49 again, and even though I don't expect much more resistance at this point, I don't want a lemming train either, so I pull up to the side a bit and let the King Cobra do its attack while covering, and then go in after the King Cobra did its attack. The Cobra fired a few bursts into the bomber, but it is still flying when the Cobra is done, so I go in to have another go. The right engine is indeed out, so this time I focus on the left one. I fire a burst into it and then pull up again to get above the fight. I climb a little bit more and then start to turn around. Now as I look back down though, I can see the traces of yet another friendly plane, a B-38, also shooting this bomber, so there's really no reason for me to go back down again. So I decide to stay above them to cover the friendly fighters in case enemy fighters show up against my expectations. And just as the bomber goes down, I can see some tracers coming from that direction, though I'm not 100% sure if they came from the bomber or an enemy fighter. But then I can see a Zero pass right below me and go after the B-38, so I come around to go after the Zero. I line up the Zero as I dive towards it, but I don't quite get the angle to fire on it and I have to pull back up. Now I'm in a bit of a difficult situation. The Zero is right behind the B-38 and might shoot it down every second. But if I go straight after the two, I will be low and slow myself and a good target should another enemy fighter show up. But since I again don't expect much resistance anymore in this game, I decide to go right after the Zero without worrying too much about my speed to get the Zero off the B-38 as fast as possible. So I end up low and slow myself, and that is exactly the kind of mistake you should never make in a Corsair or a B-38 for that matter. I get a few hits on the Zero, but not enough to take it out, and then it comes as you may have already expected. Another Zero shows up behind me. I react a bit too late, but at the moment I have not the speed to get away fast enough, nor the altitude to build that speed up fast. So the Zero eventually hits my wing, and my plane goes down. Shortly after that the game is indeed over though, as the enemy team's points run out. Now I hope this last engagement was a good example of what not to do in the plane. If you keep your speed up in this plane against the Japanese, the Corsair is almost untouchable for a Zero, as it is simply too fast for a Zero to catch. The same goes for a B-38. Just don't give your speed up willingly. Well, and this is it for this video. As always, I hope it was entertaining, thanks for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time.